You're listening to the Climate Dispatch podcast, presented by Sierra Club Angeles Chapter and Stranded Astronaut Productions. Available everywhere you listen to podcasts, we cover the stories of the climate crisis, from celebrating the wins to breaking down our fears, all while sharing collective hopes for the future. I'm your host, Taya Jeanette, and this week we're talking about the recent and devastating Los Angeles fires, how climate change is fueling extreme weather events, and why having a strong community might just be the key for building climate and emotional resilience.
We really thought we were just evacuating for a couple of days. Even seeing it, in front of my eyes, I still thought we were coming back.
That's Nina Knierim, California Area Manager at CORE, someone who has dedicated her professional life to disaster preparedness and crisis support, who also found herself losing her home in the Pacific Palisades fire. She's joined by Daniel Swain, a climate scientist, and someone who actually sounded the alarms before the fires began in January. We brought them together for our first episode on climate disasters, specifically the LA wildfires that occurred earlier this year. In January, Los Angeles experienced devastating wide-scale wildfires that destroyed over 12,000 structures and homes, burned nearly 40,000 acres of land, and at one point evacuated almost 200,000 people. Tragically, 30 lives were lost in the fires. The traumatic event occurred amongst a continued call to combat the impacts of climate change and a rise in the frequency and intensity of climate disasters worldwide. On the day of the fire, I looked out the window of my K-Town apartment to see a giant plume of smoke coming from the Santa Monica hillside. Too close for comfort, but far enough away that I knew I was at least safe from the flames. For others, like Nina, this fire was much more immediate.
I could physically see the trees in through our back windows just kind of bending over. And I did know that if there was any spark whatsoever, that it could be very dangerous, and it could become very dangerous very quickly. It was my son who saw the smoke, and I've actually taught my children, I have a 17-year-old and a 20-year-old, and my husband, all to be very weather aware, very, sort of on their toes, and have plans for all types of emergency situations. That's what I do. So, once we saw smoke, the first thing we did was go outside to see, where was it coming from? How close was it? And then I immediately pulled out my Watch Duty app to see exactly where the fire was. And as soon as I saw it and knew with all the other information that I had that this was going to be a bad situation. So I immediately went into, move mode. We had an evacuation plan. We knew what route to take because Sunset was going to be backed up no matter what, so we knew which route to take out of our neighborhood. There was no alert right away from the fire department about, an evacuation order or evacuation warning. There was an alert about a brush fire, and that's all we had to go on.
Last September, Nina and I hosted an event where we asked attendees to sign up for alerts and to start thinking about go bags or what an evacuation plan might look like. So naturally, when disaster hit her neighborhood, Nina put on her CORE hat and started knocking on doors.
So once I got my family into motion, I did put on my CORE hat to give me some semblance of authority and started knocking on my neighbors' doors. So I went around to as many houses as I could and knocked on the door. I left flyers there with the wildfire evacuation plan steps and left them if I couldn't get somebody, to answer me. And then, we were able to get ourselves out in about a half an hour. And within that time, I kept checking on the Watch Duty, and I kept looking at the sky, and it was just exponentially explosive. As we were all departing the neighborhood, I was stopping along the way to talk to people as I was leaving and explain to them that this was not the time to take videos or take pictures for posterity, that they actually needed to get into their homes and grab their, important papers and their families and their dogs, and they needed to leave immediately. It was definitely something that I will never, ever forget and is seared in my mind, but I cannot tell you how much better our experience was because we were prepared than so many of my friends, families, neighbors, etc., who did not. Honestly, you need to use those very crucial moments to think about it as like, I'm never coming back.
As the wind alerts came in, Daniel Swain was already tuned into the potential reality unfolding in front of us. With his background in meteorology and current work in climate science, Daniel knew this wildfire event could be historic, something incredibly difficult to prepare for. As he puts it,
there is a limit to what preparedness can achieve. There is only so much you can fight under certain conditions. When the fire weather conditions are just so extreme, hurricane force winds filled with billions of embers, what's known as an ember storm. That's what the fires in the Palisades and the fires in Altadena were like. I think that sometimes we forget that climate change ultimately is changes in the envelope of weather conditions, both ordinary weather when things are not particularly anomalous, or extraordinary weather when conditions are extreme. And what we saw in Southern California leading up to the devastating fires this year were several different overlapping sets of extraordinary conditions. In the days leading up to this event, in fact, potentially a week in advance in some cases, there were early indications that there could be a highly unusual wind event, even though January is in fact the peak of what's known as Santa Ana wind season in Southern California. So this time of year when relatively strong dry winds do tend to blow offshore and have historically been associated with increased fire risk.
The Santa Ana winds are an annual and frequent occurrence in Southern California. They're known for driving wildfires, and they're ingrained in LA culture. Joan Didion once wrote, "The unpredictability of the Santa Ana affect the entire quality of life in Los Angeles, accentuate its impermanence, its unreliability. The winds show us how close to the edge we are."
There was indication that this would be a notable event from a historical perspective, and that alarm increased as we got a couple of days before the event, when some very high-level, strongly worded warnings were issued publicly by the National Weather Service, as well as by other folks like myself in those days immediately leading up. But the other piece here that was really alarming even longer in the antecedent weeks and months before the event was the growing concern about how dry it had been. 2023 and 2024 winters were notably wet. In fact, some places saw their wettest 18-month period on record in that interval. But then the summer was dry, as it almost always is in LA. But then the fall was also dry, and not just a little bit dry, but bone dry, not a drop of rain in most places. And that continued into early winter, and that became more and more anomalous as we got into November, into December, and then well into January. The seasonal rains, which usually would arrive sometime between November and January, just did not. So this combination of effects, this growing concern surrounding this very long, historically dry period, and then recognizing that it was likely then within a week to be followed up by this extreme wind event, really raised the alarm bells.
And where is the relationship between the climate crisis and these extreme weather events really happening? Where are we seeing the acceleration, and what is different now?
Yeah, as you say, what's mainly different is not the winds. They were particularly strong, but they aren't necessarily getting any stronger. But what really is different is that linkage comes through the dryness of the atmosphere, and therefore the dryness of the vegetation itself that could potentially burn in a wildfire. So essentially, the aridity of the landscape and therefore its flammability. And this increases in different parts of the world, either sort of in one direction only, so a long-term trend towards increased aridity in some places, but in other parts of the world where conditions actually might be getting wetter on average in a warming climate, we still see an increase in many of those places in peak aridity. So the driest dries, the most flammable vegetation peaks becoming even more flammable and even drier, even as conditions in some places overall get wetter, which may be a little bit counterintuitive, but that's why we see such widespread linkage between climate change and increasing wildfire severity. But in California specifically, we're not necessarily getting wetter on average, and so we see an even larger increase in this wildfire risk driven primarily by increased atmospheric aridity, the literal dryness, the propensity of the air to extract water right back out of the landscape. And we're not necessarily seeing less rain. What we really see is that essentially we're expanding the length of fire season on both ends in a place like California. So beginning earlier in the spring and continuing, of course, straight through the summer, but now later into fall. And in Southern California now, increasingly into midwinter. So it's a bit of a trade-off. You have hotter, drier conditions in summer a lot of the time, but you don't have those very strong winds usually to push those fires very aggressively downhill. But in winter, we do have those downslope winds, and so if we even get just a few days a year of overlap, and honestly, that's even what happened this year, is we had lots of very, very dry days, but only a handful of very windy days, but that's all it takes. And most of these fires that we saw that were so devastating in the Pacific Palisades and in Altadena, they didn't burn for weeks before causing this damage. They burned for a matter of minutes to hours and did most of their damage and burned most of their area within a single day. We do know for sure that the wet to dry whiplash we experienced in the LA area from last winter to this winter played a role in this vegetation accumulation then desiccation cycle. So both more fuel, literally, for the fires that might be to come, and then drier fuel for the fires that did in fact come. We do expect to see more of these rapidly alternating cycles between wet and dry in a warming world, and notably not just in Southern California, but this is something that's likely to be a signature of climate change in most places in the world.
As news of the fires spread on social media, a quote began to spread with the photos and videos of the devastation. Climate change will manifest as a series of disasters viewed through your phone with footage that gets closer and closer to where you live until you're the one filming it. Humans tend to review our experiences within a context, but we never want to imagine this actually coming to our neighborhood or affecting us and our loved ones. What comes with a devastating event like this is the opportunity to learn hard lessons and redefine how we approach these situations in the future, through education, through storytelling, and through how we rebuild.
Within the context of the climate crisis exacerbating these extreme weather events, within the historical context of where these weather events happen, side of the climate crisis impacting them, and also within the context of risk mitigation strategies, what are you hoping to see be considered in the rebuilding process?
Every day you hear or read about a new headline with regards to the rebuilding. And I think one of the most recent headlines was that the mayor is going to or has released the all-electric mandate with regards to new construction. Those were put in place for this exact reason. And I would say a lot of those homes that were constructed using those restrictions and those permitting frameworks were homes that were saved.
We sometimes lack the backward-looking perspective, really, the historical perspective. But another piece of this is the fact that we're kind of out of equilibrium with our environment, even absent climate change, which is just compounding the broader challenges. It would do many of us at a societal level well to be more circumspect about what is possible in any given place. And I would rather live in a place that's done a lot of work in mitigation than in a place that has a low baseline risk. The other lesson here, as devastating as that is for the folks who live there, when you do have to rebuild from the ground up, it is probably the best opportunity you're ever going to have to make choices that really will make a community-wide difference moving forward. So it is a tragedy, and in the rebuilding, hopefully an opportunity to do better.
We can be prepared. We can work to confront the climate crisis, intensifying these events. We can rebuild with resilience in mind. But Daniel says that fires are still a reality. They're part of nature.
In many cases in the American West and globally, this is going to mean embracing more things like prescribed burning and controlled burning and fire on our terms, because of course wildfire itself is a natural, in many cases restorative process, but it can become a disaster when it intersects with populated areas, and increasingly it has done so. So it is a real problem in that form, but it's not a problem in and of itself, and I think we need to relearn our overall relationship with fire. When things get really bad, and they will increasingly get really bad in a warming world, what do we do under those circumstances? How do we get people out of harm's way, first of all, effectively? And we've learned that lesson, or not, the hard way in recent years.
This is what our new reality is, period. This is just where we are. How do we continue to live, to thrive, to just be resilient humans as we have throughout millennia, and learn how to just prepare ourselves better, because it's not going to get better in the sense that things are going to magically go back to the way they were, and it's just going to continue to be strange, and we have to be able to adapt along with that.
The impact of the Los Angeles fires extends past the physical devastation to the emotional toll of this traumatic event. Families are currently struggling with uncertainties after losing everything, and to be quite honest, the city still feels a little shaken. A majority of Americans are worried or concerned about climate change, and the term eco-anxiety has become a more popular buzzword in recent articles. But in the wake of a disaster, climate trauma might not be the first topic coming to mind.
Climate trauma is community-wide trauma. When 40% of individuals are being affected, that means 40% of the community is under trauma, which also requires community-based healing.
I sat down with Dr. Jyoti Mishra, co-director of the UC Climate Resilience Initiative, neuroscientist, and leading expert in climate trauma research, to talk about the relationship between climate-fueled disasters and mental health impacts.
A study came out last year by Lewandowski et al. That showed that amongst 20,000 youth, over 85% were moderately or extremely concerned about the climate crisis and its impacts on mental health. So there's a general framework of doom and gloom, especially for our youth generations who feel concerned about their futures. Apart from that, we are seeing an increasing level of climate-related disasters. Researchers had shown that climate-related events have public health and general physical health impacts. But only about 10 years ago did this field started to emerge about the mental health impacts of climate-related events.
Jyoti's interest in climate-related trauma started with her child, more specifically, a fundraising drive at her child's school.
My child came home one day in first grade and he was doing a fundraising drive for the campfire. When I made contact with the community leaders who were leading this fundraising drive, they told me anecdotally about the huge mental health impacts. And that's when I decided that we should start to quantify these impacts and really start a conversation in the scientific literature about our work and what's happening in these communities.
Jyoti and her colleagues' research on the 2018 Camp Fire that devastated the town of Paradise, California, and remains the deadliest wildfire in California's history, is helping us better understand the immediate and long-term mental health impacts of climate-related disasters like wildfires.
What we found was that even in this long aftermath of the campfires, there was very significant mental health impact, up to 3 times the levels of post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, and depression as would be found in a non-impacted community.
Climate trauma is not just limited to those who are directly impacted, those who lose homes or loved ones in a fire, or see it directly happening in their neighborhood. It can also affect people who know of loved ones who lost everything, who can just see the level of physical devastation in the city, who have built community across it. It can even impact people who just see it through their phones.
Strikingly, what we also found was that those who are indirectly exposed, who just witnessed the fires in their community, but were not in the way of personal harm, those individuals can also suffer from these mental health symptoms. So overall, the impacts were so large in these communities that up to 30 to 40% of the population can suffer from clinical mental health threshold symptoms. And this has not just been shown in our work, but other work related to climate disasters as well. What's been shown with research is that when trauma occurs, it's not at all necessary to know the exact cause of the trauma. We do not need to find out what exactly the individual suffered. But if we can be someone who listens with empathy and compassion to the problems that the person is facing, then it can be a great resource for someone in distress. And it's important to understand that people may have some basic needs. All they may want to know is where they're going to sleep tonight, where they might get food tonight, and to not over-interpret what their distress may be. So active listening is extremely important in that time. What is also important to understand is that many community members may be people who go inwards in the aftermath of a disaster such as this. Some people may definitely reach out for help from others, and it's important to provide them help. But then there are others who get quieter and do not want to reach out for help. Those are the people we really have to look out for. So keep calling your friends and neighbors who are not responding. Be someone who can provide simple help to them. It may be even a dinner or a little fundraiser you can do, or even a check-in that you can do with them. That can go a long way in helping your community out.
After the wildfires, Los Angeles communities came together in force, with neighbors and friends reaching out offering aid to those around them, mutual aid groups popping up across the city, to the point where some groups were overrun with donations and volunteers. Sometimes this aid was as simple as a text asking, "Are you okay?"
As we're looking at the next few months and moving forward with the healing and the rebuilding journey, what do you think we need to be providing as frameworks for the greater city of Los Angeles and people who were directly and indirectly impacted?
I would definitely say that to promote our community's mental health and well-being, to keep that door open for having conversations, and to really ask how your neighbor's feeling that day and what challenges they might be going through, and to hear out those challenges. And if they want to hear yours, sure, you can relate those too. And you know what? Sometimes when we are in a group and we go around in a circle relating each other's stressors, suddenly our own stressors become smaller because everyone is going through something. It's really important to understand that the mental health impacts can be long-lasting.
Climate emotions aren't only related to trauma from climate-related disasters. They're something we can experience on an everyday basis. Climate anxiety has been fueling the fear of young people and a lot of their decisions for the future. And people of all ages can experience emotions like grief in relation to environmental degradation. To process these emotions, spaces like climate cafes have been popping up, a place to openly talk about emotional responses to the climate crisis. Jyoti co-directs the UC Climate Resilience Initiative and has been researching the impacts of these types of events through it.
The important part is to understand collective action. And what we found was that a class that allows students and youth to process emotions together and then also engage in collective action together improves symptoms of climate anxiety, improves symptoms of depression, general anxiety, and also stress. And further, it improves mindfulness, it improves a collective efficacy. Collective efficacy is a really important skill set because for very large problems, including climate change, it is important to feel that we are part of a larger movement, and this movement together will make change. Even if we're a small part of that movement, we are making change because we're part of this bigger whole. As an individual, it's easy to feel distress. It's easy to feel that, what am I going to do? I'm just a little drop in the ocean. But when I am part of a bigger movement, then there can be joy around climate action. There can be greater hope around protecting the planet that we have. And so building on that collective efficacy, which comes from social connection, social cohesion, understanding and active listening to each other, that is a very important skill set that many of us, not just youth, but across the lifespan individuals, should be practicing and engaging in.
Collective efficacy in relation to climate action is, in simple terms, a buy-in approach to solving the issues of the climate crisis, when the community shares the belief that they can reach their goals despite the challenges ahead. It's a mantra that your own personal actions matter, because together, our actions do matter. Climate action can come in a variety of forms, including storytelling.
A little shout out to my teen son, who has a book on climate solutions called Listen Up Kids, Our Climate is Changing. And I've seen how my neighbors, many people in the community, they've read my son's book, and their kids are now asking their families to have a greener, more sustainable lives. And it starts from these little actions, and they multiply, and everyone has a role. We can either be in the state of gloom and doom and rumination, which is not helpful, and that can only lead to greater distress, or we can be someone who's engaged in action, especially when you are engaged in community action. Then you will get immediate positive feedback from the community. Remember that when we're helping out others, then we ourselves are promoting our own well-being.
Helping others and being invested in our communities can be a tool for building strong emotional resilience. But in order to take care of our community, we also have to remember to take care of ourselves.
It's very important that when we're practicing resilience, that we understand that there are two components. There is the inner component and the outer component. We just talked all about the outer component, the way we show up for others, the way we show up for our communities. And sometimes we want to show up a lot and all the time. And that can definitely lead to burnout. It is okay to rest, and it is okay to celebrate that rest, because that rest will lead to greater engagement when the time is right.
So are there any mindfulness techniques or coping skills that we can learn to do just on our own in our own houses?
I personally really like being in nature and being aware of just the pure joy that nature brings. Nature can be extremely rejuvenating. In the context of the campfire and also the Lahaina fires, the communities came together and started eco-mindfulness, eco-therapy groups where they were practicing mindfulness in nature. When climate disasters happen, then our relationship with nature really breaks down, and we start to feel the sense of angst and trauma to the very nature that can be rejuvenating at other times. So that connection with the natural environment, when it's a safe environment again, needs to be rebuilt.
The efforts to rebuild the beloved trails and hillsides in Altadena and the Pacific Palisades are already underway, from native plant seeding to large-scale restoration efforts. Volunteer signups have been overwhelming, seemingly underlining a want to connect with the nature around us after this disastrous event. During the fires, Angelenos also found a kinship with the animals impacted, leaving out water bowls for displaced deer and raccoons. As it becomes safe to rebuild and regrow, Jyoti puts extra emphasis on practicing mindfulness and respect as we return to these natural landscapes, allowing nature to aid in the healing journey and seeing ourselves as eco-stewards.
just as other humans are like us, so are other species. And to have that same sense of respect for every living creature is how we are going to have a better planet together. Hopefully, when LA has come to a point of bouncing back and there's new grass on the ground and there's new trees coming up again, then there'll be ways to connect with nature in that setting as well.
As we begin the rebuilding process here in LA, we have to see ourselves as eco-stewards and as a part of nature. We also have to look at the historical context to avoid making the same mistakes, tell our important stories, and most of all, be there for our community.
Hi, it's Megan from the Sierra Club Angeles chapter, here to tell you about this week's climate action item. Imagine a place where rugged peaks teem with flora and fauna, history runs deep, and clean water flows. That's the Northern Angeles National Forest. It's a hub of critical wildlife corridors, super abundant in biodiversity and brimming with cultural significance. Iconic landmarks such as the historic Ridge Route and the Pacific Crest Trail reveal the breathtaking beauty and lasting legacy of Southern California. Just north of Santa Clarita, this stunning and irreplaceable landscape remains unprotected. Now, we have a rare opportunity to change that. Add your name to our letter of support today and help preserve this remarkable place for future generations. Sign the letter at sc.org/forest committee. That's sc.org/forest committee.
Thanks for listening to The Climate Dispatch. I'm your host, Taya Jeanette, and playing us out is local band Downtime with their song, Realize.
like it's too late, feels like it's too soon. It's a nameless fate when there is no end. I've already been here, I don't want to pretend. Realize that I had it good, and all the things I could have been doing are gone. Realize when I'm here with you, that I'm here with you.
The Climate Dispatch is a production of Stranded Astronaut and the Sierra Club Angeles chapter, produced by myself, Tay Jeanette, Meg Pruce, and Megan Spatz. Audio engineering and editing by Maxfield Biggs, original theme music and score by Phil Hamilton, and graphics by Cirrus Marlo Sama.